Greetings everybody around the world. It's time once again for Ancient Aliens Radio. This is the dedicated radio show for the cast of Ancient Aliens. Here we interview authors and researchers as an ongoing investigation into the ancient alien theory. Don't forget to like us on Facebook or subscribe to the YouTube channel Ancient Aliens Radio. So today we'll be joined by Christopher Dunn, who's been on the show before, and we're going to get an Egypt update from him from his recent tour with my friend and colleague Gary Evans. But before we do, another quick announcement. Just check out the new Facebook group, and you can follow the links on the Facebook page to discuss topics on the show. Keep the emails coming in. I do answer them all. I will get to them eventually. And it's nice to see such interest in the show. Follow the links in the capricornradio.com there for the Facebook group or the Facebook page. And you can also check the upcoming guests in the Facebook section, in the event section. There's an event guide there in Facebook, so that's a pretty interactive way to check guests as well. And also on the Egypt theme, I have Robert Boval tomorrow, so that'll be an interesting show as well. So the last time we talked to Chris Dunn, we discussed the Giza power plant theory and his book, The Giza Power Plant. Today we're going to be discussing lost technologies of ancient Egypt, advanced engineering in the Temple of the Pharaohs, and he's going to give us an update on his recent trip there. So let's not delay our guest anymore. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, James.
Sure. Now, man, what a beautiful book that is. Like, I'm an engineer, Chris. I appreciate this stuff. Like, but I guess, the thing for me is I don't see, with the Giza power plant too as well, I can't see Egyptology in the same light again. It's things change when you read your books, Chris. This is not a paradigm shift. This is a paradigm buster, this stuff.
Well, thank you. Egypt certainly changed for me after I paid it a visit. Even before, when I was reading about all the information that is not generally available to people when they're in school, my mind was changed then, but actually visiting Egypt opens your mind quite a bit, particularly for an engineer.
Sure. And I guess that's the thing. A lot of engineers flock there, and the engineers have a different eye, Chris, and I guess that's what we talked about last time, and this is the difference that you bring to the table. Obviously you'd work in a different engineering. You work in the precision engineering field, and you understand precision. You've got the eye for it. You understand tool making and tooling, and this is what the Egyptians did. They engineered very difficult, complex designs, and I guess this was like a play field for you when you went there and you turned it into research then. Would that be fair to say?
Oh, that is a very, very good description of it. Just to kind of bridge the gap between now and when I started my career and how precision plays into it. Mm-hmm. I began an apprenticeship at a very young age in Manchester.
Sure.
Down the road from David, just a stone throw away, right, David?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
And of course, Mancunians and Liverpudlians always hold a tremendous respect for each other.
I like your humor, Chris.
And talking to you guys, my accent is probably going to drift back into my Mancunian accent. I don't know. But
I'm always intrigued by your accent, Chris, because it sort of drifts between the two all the time.
Yeah, man without a country, I think. No, I've been actually honored and humbled to be able to explore and discover and bring this information to light. And it's very gratifying to meet fellow engineers all over the world that appreciate that and are adding their own voice to it. So it's incredibly satisfying to me.
I guess in a way it kind of reminds me of when Shock has the geologists on his side, because geology follows the science, and Egyptology doesn't have qualifications or any right to discuss really in-depth scientific geology or engineering. They're not qualified engineers. They're not qualified geologists. And these are the two battles that they're fighting, I guess, Chris, is what I'm trying to say. But, like, I mean, Shock will have his followers of geology. And like you, Chris, you know, anybody that's into science and engineering can clearly see the problem that these Egyptologists are facing with copper chisels, highly machined granites and diorites, extremely hard stones. And I think what you've brought to the table is you've brought this methodology for people that have any even technological know-how to go, well, we don't have the engineering eye, but Chris does, and he's able to present it in his books and in this manner and show us the problems, show us that there must be tooling, there must be machines, something had to guide these chisels or whatever they carved this stuff with, like.
Well, yes, obviously the facts are there, they're on the ground, and all you have to do is go and look at it and measure it. Mm-hmm. And of course we can discuss about what kind of tools were used. Mm-hmm. But in those discussions among engineers, you never hear any mention of copper chisels or stone pounders or anything like that. So, they kind of move beyond that notion. But, having said that, I would also say that archaeology is a respected field.
Sure.
Egyptology, the offshoot of it, is a respected field.
Sure.
And I think along the way, they try to engage in certain experts. But as you know yourself, when you talk about culture within a particular society or civilization, no one person has all the answers in terms of explaining what that culture was about, what they were doing. And in the area of manufacturing, that is the cultural environment of manufacturing that I have been in, both in the UK and in the States. We think alike. So, along the same lines, we may describe certain objects, have different names for them. Mm-hmm. But still, in terms of the physical requirements and demands that materials present to us in shaping them or turning them, adding value to them, making them useful, they're pretty much universal. And because we're faced with the same constraints, the same problems, same difficulties.
Sure.
And so if you don't have somebody in the room that has, that kind of background and understanding, then I think that you're probably going to miss a lot, and a lot has been missed.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we're going to talk advanced machining in ancient Egypt, Chris.
Yeah.
To do that, we're going to talk about certain artifacts, certain places in Egypt. I suppose let's head to Luxor first. The art and the temples there is probably the best. I mean, I know you in your first area of research, you researched the pyramids, but you followed on your research and the metrology, the science of precision and measurement, and you've ended up going to Luxor on several occasions and looking at the art, the temples, and it's very appealing. It's this is like, it's jaw dropping looking at this stuff. And just for the listeners, some of this stuff's done in pink granite where you can see your reflection in it. Like, that's how highly polished, and there's lovely curves. And as you say, I liked when you wrote in the book about the engineer running their hand, because when you finish a product in the manufacturing industry, it's what you do as a human. You put your hand on your, like a finished car or whatever, or a paint job, or, you would run your hand over it. And right. I was laughing when I was reading your book, because I can just picture you in Egypt running your hands over these ancient statues and stuff, like, and just to...
Yeah, that's the first thing that you do. I mean, before you open your toolbox and pull out your instruments, it's that tactile connection
with
the piece. And like you said, if you are in manufacturing, you're creating a die for a car body or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You're checking form, you're checking finish,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of that has to do with the hand and the eye.
Sure. Yeah, so let's talk about these head jets and the arcs and the symmetry and their true radius, and this is beautiful, and I love what you do, Chris. I really do, because it's founded in mathematics. It's founded in this new. I know what you do with the symmetry and the overlaying of transparencies and stuff. So perhaps talk about the head jet and the arcs first.
Yeah. Well, those are the white crowns of Upper Egypt, and they're conical shaped.
Mm-hmm.
And I first kind of connected with them the first time I went into the Luxor temple, and and we were with a tour group. It was 2004, and it was in the evening, and that's when they recommend that you visit that temple, because it is quite inspiring with the lighting, and it has quite an allure to it.
Mm-hmm.
And the Egyptologists were discussing the reliefs and the hieroglyphs on the walls and telling the story. And I noticed that these granite headsets just laying in front of these statues. The statues were broken,
Sure.
some of them, but these objects seemed to gleam in the light. And so I walked up to one of them, and I just ran my hands over it, and I was absolutely amazed at the finish and the apparent perfection and smoothness of the object. So that impressed me, and it stayed with me for quite a long time. But I didn't use the digital photography at that time. That was in 2004. I think I had a film camera with me, but I was a speaker on the tour, and so I wasn't there to, take photographs of. Well, I could have taken photographs, but it just wasn't what I was there for. I was there to be with the guests.
Sure.
So, whatever guests were interested, I kind of pointed these out and expressed, a certain amount of interest in them and excitement that we find in a temple, the same kind of surface finish and apparent precision that I had noted in around Giza, on the Giza Plateau and in the Valley Temple.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but, I filed that away, but then it was a couple of years later that I started to get the urge to do more research. And I was interested in learning more about the work of Schwaller de Lubicz, and I'm also fascinated with the work of John Anthony West.
Sure.
And so I signed on for one of his tours in 2006. It was February 2006. So I signed on as a just as a guest. Mm-hmm. And, but I had the intention of going into the Luxor temple, as well as receiving his information, being able to do more work with those headdresses. Mm-hmm. And I bought I think it was an 8 megapixel camera, digital camera, because in the few years prior to that, one of the metrology instruments that was becoming more popular in manufacturing and being used more and more was the optical acquisition of data. So you photograph a part with a digital camera, mm-hmm. and then you import it into a graphics program or a CAD program, mm-hmm. or any special purpose program to measure it. And, with the resolution of the camera and also the resolution of the software itself, you can measure something to within a thousandth of an inch or even less.
Sophisticated then, Chris.
Very sophisticated, yes. And these instruments are being applied more and more. And today they're getting extremely sophisticated with three-dimensional systems that will photograph something in 3D and then model it in the computer in 3D, revealing very complex surfaces and then comparing the surface that has been created with the actual model that is held in the computer. So that technology was growing. And so I said, well, as far as actually measuring one of these things, the least I could do is take digital photographs and then bring them into my computer program, and to the best of my ability and the software that I had, just see if there is anything there that I cannot see just with the naked eye. So one of the one object I photographed was the head jet, and the conical crown. And my camera was handheld. I also photographed the Ramses head, but not with the intention of taking an accurate photograph that would be able to reveal what I ultimately revealed after several visits after that. But and I took the photographs, and then, the tour moved on. We went to other places, but I had my PC with me, and I was importing the photographs and looking at them in my room. And I got very excited because the information that was revealed was a lot more than I expected. And for instance, the photograph of the head jet, the white crown, that revealed that both sides were identical. The radius on both sides of the cone were identical, and I did that by bringing the photograph into my computer software, describing circles, and then matching the circles against each side. And then I even made a copy of the photograph, turned it into a transparency, flipped it horizontally, and then matched both sides that way. So, just even without asking the question, well, just how precise is it? I mean, down to a thousandth of an inch, or even half a thousandth of an inch. What quantitative measures could I gain from that? And I had to leave that question because I wasn't able to determine what the exact dimensions were. But just visually looking at it, and then remembering the first time and also the last time that I ran my hands over it, it seemed that what was happening was the Egyptians were machining these pieces to certain geometry that was very precise, symmetrical, and also that they were probably encoding information in them. What that information was at the time, I don't know. But anyway, that was incredibly exciting.
Sure.
And then the Ramses head in the forecourt, outside the Luxor temple. And I looked at that in my computer, and that was it's like some things actually draw you for whatever reason. You're drawn to them, and you need to know as much information about them as possible because of this kind of attraction that you have.
Is this the Ramses head? Sorry, Chris. Is this the Ramses head from the Revelation of the Pyramids documentary? Is this
Yeah.
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 This is okay. So maybe just explain the reverse transparency technique for those who haven't seen that. But I'm sure when listening to the show, they probably will want to see it. But
Yeah.
because this is the one that really grabs me. And if anybody doesn't understand metrology or precision measurement, I mean, the reverse transparency technique just sings praises for what these guys did. Like, you know, you can see the mirror imaging of and the perfection in just the transparency of photograph.
Yes, and that technique is, it's very simple. Well, at least for the operator of the computer, you take the photograph and my software has a function where you can make it like a 50% transparency. So you make it see-through in effect.
Sure.
You can still see the features of it, but you can look through it to any photograph or object that is behind it. And then taking that photograph and reversing it along the horizontal plane, so you're just flipping it around, and then overlaying it onto the original photograph, and then comparing both sides of the features of the head, the right to the left.
And then we see that whole bilateral symmetry in the face. The left eye matches up with the right eye, the cheek with the cheek, the width.
It's quite surprising when it's done. The 2008 Revelations of the Pyramids documentary, when they interviewed me, I didn't have the perfect example that I was able to gain later in the year, because I went back in November of 2008 and I was able to take a photograph that was closer to the central axis of the head.
Yeah.
But even that photograph, it's like you could, and to explain to the listeners that, you know, when you have a three-dimensional object and it has been manufactured or machined for you, the designers actually created in Cartesian coordinates. You have your X, Y, Z, these three planes, from which the dimensions or the geometry is built on those X, Y, Z planes. So when you look at the Ramses head, you see a photograph, you're looking at the XY plane.
Sure, it's two-dimension photograph, but it's
right.
In reality, the whole thing is a three-dimension.
But in reality, you have the Z plane, which is moving, away from you and passing through the object. That is, that is not discernible when you take a two-dimensional photograph. And so my first photograph that I took, the head or the camera orientation was shifted a little bit. So the Z plane was a little off axis with my camera. And what happens when that happens, you have features on the object that are closer to you and features that are further away on the Z plane. And it causes a shift. If you flip it, you may be able to match up features of the nose, but the jawline will be thrown off a little bit, simply because the angle of orientation is off a little bit. And so my first photographs had that kind of shift, but still, it was understanding the problem. That if I was able to take a photograph that was exactly along the Z plane, I would capture the X, Y, and Z in the same orientation as the object was designed and built. So
significant for the accuracy, isn't it, Chris? This is highly significant because you get the perfect accuracy of what you're trying to do, then what you're trying to achieve.
Well, when you consider what we know about that ancient culture and what we know about ancient Egypt and what we've been taught, just the fact that you are asking those questions is significant enough.
Sure.
Because you've already captured enough information to explore that third axis further, to determine the reality of the piece. How precise is it? Because we're talking about three-dimensional geometry surfaces that we create today in manufacturing to manufacture several products, many products, in fact, a computer mouse or a car or a television, cell phones, all of these have three-dimensional geometry that are created in computers, and that information drives machine tools that create the dies to manufacture them. And so finding similar situation or a similar kind of body of knowledge that reaches forward from thousands of years ago, and it says, look at this. This is what we were doing thousands of years ago,
mm-hmm.
and now you're catching up with us.
And it's funny, you just mentioned at the start of the show there, Chris, where technology was only developing, as you were saying, in 2004, just to measure this stuff with computerized software and techniques. Like, that's just to measure it, to be able to accurately say this is happening.
Yeah, and digital photography and manufacturing's been out for quite a bit. The manufacturing company that I was working in was beginning to introduce it and be interested in it. It was becoming a little more prevalent in manufacturing, and so while it may have existed in some of the larger companies and labs, it takes a while for that technology to spread and be accepted. So in 2004 was pretty much where I kind of said, well, here it is. When I was going to Egypt in 1986 and using a 35 millimeter film camera, I had never realized that instead of a square, a straight edge, and calipers or whatever else I was using, I never realized that a lot of the metrology instruments that we use today for measuring pieces, like numerical controlled computer coordinate machines, and so it's like
optical lasers and
all that stuff. It never occurred to me that I would have in my hands something that I could at least achieve a percentage of what was being done without any physical instruments, without having to worry the guards or get permission to physically measure an object, because I was just another regular tourist,
sure,
with a camera, and so it was quite an amazing period of time when I was doing that research, and the results obviously are fairly significant. There are imperfections on those statues, and also on the headdresses.
I think that's something you point out, Chris, in the Lost Technologies in Egypt. You do point out when there is imperfections, and you do make note of that. You don't make these guys out to be, super engineers. Like, yes, they were very advanced, but there was sometimes imperfections, and you've spotted some errors in the tool marks, and you would expect to see that too, Chris, wouldn't you? You would expect to see some sort of a manufacturing process where it may have gone wrong, but covered up and smoothed out, and etc.
Yeah, the Ramses statue in the British Museum is a prime example, because what you see there is you have the same geometry, you have the same symmetry, bilateral symmetry, the perfection of the face, but look over here. there's a slip of the tool.
Mm.
And that's in the corner of the mouth. So if you go into the British Museum, go look at the Ramses statue and pay close attention to the mouth, and it's on the left side of the face. The right side when you're looking at it, but the left side of Ramses' face.
I'm going to be there in 2 weeks, Chris. I'm going to be.
Yeah. So
I'm going to
take a
do
look
it
at-
exactly that.
Yeah, a slip of the tool. And it's like the tool was driven deeper at that point into the mouth, leaving a cavity, that, it makes old Ramses look like he's snarling rather than smiling, but they had attempted to improve the appearance by cutting the lips deeper.
Mm.
And so by cutting the lips deeper, they removed,
Yeah.
a portion of that mistake. It was probably more pronounced when they noticed it. And why it happened, I don't know, but you can imagine that if you have an automated machine crafting a particular feature and the material shifts, then you're going to have that problem, or maybe the tool actually comes loose, or there's all kinds of mistakes that can happen when you're involved in that process. It's just a fact of life.
Sure.
And so when I found that, it's like confirmation to me. It's just like, oh wow, it looks like it's machine, but wait a minute. Yeah, the damn thing was machine, because look at this.
Yeah.
A sculptor would not create that.
Yeah. You wouldn't.
And when you look at the cusp of the lips, where they cut the lips deeper, they sunk them deeper into the face, very pronouncedly. You have this very sharp cusp where the lips meet the vermilion border, and the philtrum. There is a kind of a triangular cusp there.
Sure.
That is very sharp. And so understanding how sculptures work and understanding how machining is done, you can take the sculptor, the handwork off the table, clearly.
Yeah.
They don't leave those kinds of mistakes.
Yeah. Dave, sorry, Chris. Dave, do you want to jump in there at some point for a question, or?
Well, just really to ask you, Chris, about the this method of creating the statue of Ramesses, very much based on symmetry, very much based on geometry. Have you come to any conclusions as to why the ancient Egyptians would work in this way to produce some kind of likeness of Ramesses? Did those aspects of it cross your mind when you were discovering all this?
Yes, of course. And the why, the how, and the when is always a prominent question. One of the things that I did notice, and because I didn't have an authorized photograph, I didn't use it in my book, and I didn't really enter into the discussion of are the Ramses statues actually images of Ramses the Great, Ramses II. And if you compare the geometry, the facial geometry of the Ramses mummy, a profile of the Ramses mummy. So you have the relative positions of the nose, the ears, and the mouth. Mm-hmm. And you overlay that with the Ramses statue, the information that you have on the Ramses statue, they don't match. They're not even close. And of course, the question is out there and has been proposed by other people, were these artifacts adopted? And we know that cultures will personalize objects from previous civilizations or previous generations, just particularly in that area where they try to remove or obliterate symbols or images that reflect a different belief system.
Yeah.
And so
Akhenaten being one of the most famous, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so we know that was happening. And then of course, when we consider the presumed technology that was necessary to create these artifacts, I have to ask the question, does this actually strip the artifact away from Ramses or the time of Ramses and push the time period further back?
Wow.
And there are lots of indications that was actually happening. And you'll find also in the Luxor Temple and in other facilities, areas, the Serapeum near Saqqara is one of them, where you'll find the crude scratches of later cultures that are personalizing these objects, and they are nothing like the ancient tool marks. They don't have the quality. They don't have the precision, the surface finishes. They're just nothing like it. They're just crude scratches. And
you mentioned in the book about Amenhotep, there's something like 250 plus statues of him, and it kind of beckons the idea of a production line of these guys mass producing statues in a way.
Well, isn't it funny that engineers would think like that, James? Because that's exactly what I thought. It's almost like, they had this model.
Replicate it.
They replicated it.
Get it to work once, make sure it's right, and then just reproduce it.
Right. Why not?
Why not? Yeah. I mean, if the empire was so big and you want to dominate the empire and you want your picture everywhere, I mean, mass production is the way, is it not? So.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that it was that they wanted to represent any particular person or even to dominate their empire. It is a common theme though through history where great leaders will have images of themselves created, or they will create great works that memorializes them. And then, the greater the work, the more intimidated their enemies will be. And but to me, the Ramses statue, it doesn't have that kind of feel to it. If you look at the geometry and the representation that it invokes, you can see, certain harmony with it. I mean, I bring that out in my book too, because, and then in a presentation that I did on the Nile on the Egypt trip, when I introduced the photograph that showed the flower of life.
Oh, yeah.
Superimposed on the Ramses face, and you see the correspondences between the features of the face, such as the eyes, the lips, the nose, and the pineal gland, the location of the pineal gland in the center of the forehead. You'll see that the flower of life seems to incorporate all of that, yeah.
And something you also go into is you use Fibonacci spirals, Pythagorean geometry, and the golden ratio to show the illustrious artistic mix of technology and art. It's this wonderful woven mix they have. It's like art and technology. You can't tell where one stops and the other one finishes.
Yes, that's and that is kind of like for me that's a philosophical question. When you're looking at a blending of art, harmony, technology. And what part of that do you actually resonate with? And I find myself resonating with all of it more than I used to, because when I first started my research, I was looking at it with my left brain. But when you start to ask those philosophical questions about, what is the most important feature on this object, and it kind of brought me to the realization that the most important story behind it is the inspiration behind it. And that's the most important story in our civilization, is the spirit, the inspiration.
Why carve something so complex, so difficult, so ingenious, because you have the skill to do it, perhaps?
Yes, and there is a school of thought and that the ancient Egyptians were not, or the Cometians, which is what Stephen Mailer proposes,
sure.
And which I actually believe strongly, that there was a civilization prior to the ancient Egyptians, and they lived in a state of harmony, and the right and left brain were functioning
together.
And so, they were transferring information, much as our geniuses and inventors do in accessing information that has not been revealed about nature, about the universe, and then transferring that information to the left brain and processing it in a three-dimensional world, and showing what that genius can create. That's how our civilization has developed. But the school of thought, looking back, shows that they were working on both sides of the brain. So whereas you may take an individual and say, okay, I'm going to create a statue of somebody who looks like Tutankhamun. And even that, you look at the human body, I mean, that's divinely inspired, obviously. But but to say, I'm going to create a statue that represents universal harmony and is going to incorporate sacred geometry, and I'm going to create it in such a way that it conveys that information on a very subtle level that people will actually tune into and be affected by, then Egypt is a perfect example of that. Not just, the statues, but also the temples and the pyramids. It's just a perfect example of that kind of condition that existed in the minds of the geniuses that were involved in it.
Do you want to jump in there for a question, Dave?
Well, yeah, I mean, just to really share some ideas and get Chris's take on it, really, because I can't help thinking when I see, the symmetry and the geometry in all of this and the way it's perceived, that somehow the ancient peoples had a different perception of this. Maybe it was more through the right brain than the left brain, as you say, because I think our society is very much left brain dominated. But I wonder if, in a sense as well, there's something about making a statement, if you like, in this ancient geometric art and so on, that is about saying that all proceeds from order, all proceeds from geometry, all proceeds from number, rather in the way that Plato spoke of, the ideal world. And I just wondered what you thought about that sort of notion, Chris.
Well, I agree with it. Obviously the thought behind the creation of ancient Egypt was rooted in this divine inspiration and wonder, an exploration of the of nature around us, because all we have to do is look into nature to access that information. And so the right brain, I have come to the conclusion, is actually it's more important to us than the left brain. The left brain is kind of a functionary part of our being, I think. And it's pretty much the only way that we can express in a three-dimensional world, or actually convince in a three-dimensional world, because you can have your right brain working and you can be inspired with great thoughts, and then of course if you are articulate and convincing, you can have people try to understand what your information you're gathering through your right brain, through your words and writing, art, and sculpture. But the sculpting, of course, you have that practical, the practical side of you, where you need tools, you need to know how to use those tools. But the sculptor, if he is, true to his craft, he is definitely tuned into his right brain and understanding the materials, how to work with the materials, and what kind of shapes or images he wants to create. And I suppose, in a way, when some people may be a little turned off if you say, oh no, well, the Ramses statues were machined, because that kind of puts it in a cold, hard, smokestack factory environment where
takes the mystic out of it.
Yeah, it takes the glamour out of it, the kind of spiritual aspect of it. But that's where we make a mistake, because we have this kind of dichotomy, where we have said, oh, okay, spirit good, material bad. When really, in reality, everything is spirit. Even within the material world, how can you distinguish between what is spiritual and what is not spiritual, when the driving force in everything that we do is spiritual?
Would you like to have worked with the engineers back then, Chris?
I sure would. Yeah, I think that would have been a real joy. To go back in time and actually, even if as an observer and looking over their shoulder, or going around with a brush and an ash pan and
jotting down the trade secrets
and sweeping up their shavings, I think that would have been cool.
Okay, so sorry, just want to jump in there. On that note, these guys, let's say they are machining, okay? Let's say I tell you now, Chris, there's your CNC machine in the modern age. Do me a statue of Ramses, the best one that's out there. Pick one that's the best one, the most 3D perfect one. And I say, do it out of the hardest material, the hardest granite you can get. How difficult is that to do, Chris? Even with all the modern machinery, it's obviously can be done, yeah? How perfect is it going to come out? Is there going to be any errors? Is it going to have to be done 2 or 3 times? Can mistakes happen? Is the finish going to come out perfect? Talk us through that process, what we would have to do in the modern age.
Well, today we have machine tools, obviously, and also we have computer software that could model a Ramses head or face or the whole body quite easily. Well, I'd say quite easily. I mean, obviously there'd be quite a bit of work to do, but it's definitely within our reach to do that. that is a discipline and a skill in itself. But then you'd have to involve the quarry workers who would deliver the material. So you have to look at the industry that supports that and the infrastructure, and then also the tools that they use for quarrying. So the whole process and all the ancillary requirements to the final cutting of the face, where the beauty is finally revealed. There's a lot involved, and today, of course, we know how to quarry. We know how to haul materials. Of course, some of the Ramses statues are quite heavy. You're talking a few hundred tons. So, the material would be expensive. And then the designers would probably not be the people who are tending the machines. You would have different people doing that.
Different crew, yeah.
Yeah. And, in industry, a lot of times it is, well, most of the time, it's wise not to mix crafts, because say you have a production worker or a machinist or, a machine operator who's making production parts. He is, his training is to, is on production. And so
acquire skills in that one zone.
Yeah, he acquires certain skills, and those skills are to make parts the most efficiently within the requirements. But you won't want to take production parts and put them in a gauge shop or a tool shop where you have gauge makers and tool makers who have been trained to actually be a lot more careful in how they measure and how they cut. Because the efficiencies would go down. So, they would, the requirements on a tool maker are not the same as the requirements on a machinist. And so, that you have these different classes of trades where you may have a certain class who will be roughing out the statue, taking the bulk of the material away from it, and then perhaps they would pass it on to the final
finishing
machinist using a different set of tools. And
do you have any? But my point then is, Chris, knowing what's all involved and all that, and the immense effort even in today's standards, what do you think the machines could? Do you have any idea what the machines could have been? Obviously, that's a big question. If there was machine tooling, I'm thinking maybe something like the Roman contraptions of these wooden catapults that they made. Could it be made out of wood? Does it need to be metallurgy involved? Maybe the actual tool bits were metal, but perhaps they had like wooden contraptions with arms and sliding rails and stuff. Perhaps that, Chris?
I've kind of discounted that. The use of wood in controlling as a mechanical a piece of a machine or mechanical member of a machine. Wood does not have the precision, or could not produce the same kind of precision that we find.
Expands with the heat and cold and the density and.
Right, exactly. And so, I kind of discount that because of the
tolerances. That's the
tolerances. Yeah. Because, you go to other areas of Egypt and you say, okay, so, we haven't really quantified the precision of these Ramses statue. How can we say that the ancient Egyptians knew the tolerances that we work with? Well, all you have to do is go to into the Serapeum, Saqqara, and go through the rock tunnels there and examine the boxes that you'll find in the Serapeum.
I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. Let's talk how that's probably one of the most precise things you've measured in Egypt, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's like the smoking gun for me in terms of the level of technology that they had achieved. because it reflects the development of their understanding of manufacturing, and not just that these things exist, but they were no accident. They were perfectly in command of an understanding of geometry. They were in command of an understanding of precision down to a fraction of an inch. Not only, over a small period or a short distance, but over a long distance. So the boxes in the Serapeum, I first went there in 1995, and I was quite shocked to find I had a straight edge with me, and I was quite shocked to find that the surface of the boxes seemed to me to be as in the same condition or as precise as what I know in a tool shop or an inspection lab with a granite surface plate, and those objects are finished to within about 2/10,000ths of an inch. And here I have a straight edge with an extremely flat surface that was finished to within 2/10,000ths of an inch, and I'm sliding it along this piece of granite in Egypt that was created thousands of years ago, and I'm finding the same condition.
Wow.
And then I was back again in 2001, and I was able to go down there. I had a very precise toolmaker's square with a 14-inch blade, because I wanted to find out just how square, what was the geometry, how square the inside of these boxes were. And I was amazed to find, I put the blade on the surface of the inside wall and the base on the underside of the lid, and I was amazed to find that it was perfectly square.
So, Chris, have you come to any conclusions in all this about what these boxes are for? Because to my mind, they sure as hell aren't sarcophagi for Apis bulls, and it just seems incredible that this degree of precision was used to create them, and not only that, to move them into these tiny spaces, weighing what do they weigh, about 85 tons or something?
Yes, they probably would have weighed that or more when they were brought down. And the other incredible thing is that they were finished underground, which is
Wow.
because you find a rough box actually in situ there in one of the passageways. It has no finish on it whatsoever, and also an unfinished lid. But the lids weigh about 20 tons just themselves. So if you take the whole assembly, you've got about 80 tons of granite there. But just the fact that they brought them understand speaks volumes to me, because and also reinforces the idea that they needed to achieve that precision. They needed it for a reason, because. Yeah. If you had finished that box in a different environment, say above ground, in a different temperature, with the sun shining down or whatever, and then you bring it down into the cool confines of these rock tunnels, then the temperature differential would cause some warping of the material, and then you would lose that extreme precision. But and that itself, actually, as I said, it reinforces the intention of the builders to achieve something very precise. Now, you asked the question, what do you think that precision was for? Well, I would dismiss the idea that they crafted these boxes so that they could put the carcass of a bull in there. Yeah. And I have to consider a more technological purpose. And of course, with my previous research on the Great Pyramid and the conclusion that I made that the ancient scientists, engineers, were working with resonance and harmonics. They had, I have to think that their technology was based on sound and harmony and resonance, and that harmony and resonance and frequencies were in tune with nature, with the earth, and with the universe. So these boxes, I think, from my perspective, were resonant cavities. Now, what the objective was, and in fact, as far as what they were achieving, that's a bit of a mystery. I mean, you can speculate that they were a part of the entire system.
Caffrey's pyramid had a granite box as well, didn't it?
Yes.
And that's pretty accurate as well, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. The same kind of accuracy in the Caffrey's pyramid as you find in the Serapeum.
So is there acoustics effects in the Serapeum as well? Is there strange anomalies like the Caffrey's pyramid?
No, not like that. Within the box, well, within any enclosed space where you have flat walls, you'll have reflections. But as far as the tunnels themselves, that I didn't pick up that there was any intention for them to be anything but access tunnels. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me that whole area, the Saqqara area, it's almost like it's riddled with tunnels, and the bedrock is like I don't know, it's like a soundboard. I mean, sound travels extremely well through that area. Mm-hmm. There are areas that you can go to near the Saqqara pyramid where sound will be traveling through the ground. Even the throb of the buses in the parking lot, you could be, hundreds of feet away. You can go into areas where you will actually hear that thrum,
Sure. Of course, we're talking about material goods that these guys left us, and we're analysing the technical achievements of this, but these guys were advanced in cosmology and astronomy and acoustics. We know this, these guys were advanced in many areas, and we're just talking about one specific area today, so these guys thought in different ways for sure. Tell us about the Abu Roash concave block, Chris, on this big megasaw and the pits, and this is beautiful. This is absolutely jaw-dropping and astounding,
It is. It's the smoking gun. I mean, that bit of research was incredible for me, because I was able to demonstrate and show very clearly that not only do you have the shape of the tool defined, you have the orientation of the tool, and you also have the marks that the tool left. Mm-hmm. And this is a concave block that shows that they were using a saw that was about 37 feet in diameter.
Wow!
And I know it sounds astounding, doesn't it?
Megasaw, you call it?
Yes, the megasaw. I mean, it's bigger than the channel borer, that went through the.
The tunnel.
I think that was about 27 feet in diameter.
Wow.
So, but it kind of puzzled me at the start, because I was looking at and examining flat surfaces all over the place,
Yeah.
And I was at Abu Rawash, which is about 5 miles away from Giza. It's up on a hillside.
Yeah. And you can see Giza from there, can't you? You can see the pyramids.
Yeah, sure you can. But I climbed to the top of the pyramid, and I'd walked over to one of the corners, and I noticed that there was this shiny black piece of granite down near the base, and I thought, maybe something I can put my straight edge on. So I walked down and I walked up to it and I put my straight edge on it and I go, wow, that's not flat. That's got a curve to it. And so at that time I was like, that's very interesting. I'm going to have to examine this a little more. I was actually with your friend David Childress at the time, our friend David Childress.
Yeah.
And he had hooked up with me after I'd finished the tour with John Anthony West, and we did some filming at that time. But anyway, that was it for that particular trip. I'm looking at it. I'm looking at this curve on the surface, and then I see where the piece had broken off, and right at the break point, there are these curves too. And so it indicated that, yeah, they had used a saw. But the question in my mind was, well, what kind of saw was it? How big a diameter was it? How did they fixture it? All of these questions, I walked away with in my head unanswered. And so then in 2006, that was, of course, the place I headed towards. I needed to go there and check it out further, which I did. And this time though, with my camera, I took a very good, tripod or camera stand and so that I would be able to take the photographs carefully, and make sure that the camera was still. I also had a zoom macro lens so that I could zoom in on the surface and take a photograph that would reveal more about the surface of the granite. So my intention then was to take photographs along the X plane, or the Y plane, and the X and the Z plane. It just involved, actually, the analysis just involved the Z plane and the Y plane. If you consider the Z plane to be the center of a cylinder, and then the Y plane, the vertical line going through that center. I took photographs along the Z and the Y plane. And then looking at those photographs, we see that there are these arcs where the saw actually stopped. And by measuring the geometry of those arcs, I was able to determine the dimension and the angle of the saw. But when I saw that it was about over 37 feet in diameter, my jaw dropped. I was like, nobody's going to believe this, And in fact, many people don't. But the devil's in the details, and anybody can go out there and take their own photographs and do their own analysis. But that piece needs to be in a metrology shop, or needs to be in a lab and examined in great detail, because it is a smoking gun. If you look at very closely at the surface, you'll see that the feed lines are quite regular, and pronounced. And so this is not an object that was created with a copper chisel or a bouncing ball. Totally impossible. But then, thinking about that size saw, I was like, well, how did they fixture it? Because what you have is a saw is 37 feet in diameter. And, when you saw something with something like that, you'd be moving the piece rather than the saw, and you'd have to get it up on the axis. So you have to be at the center of the saw. And then I was like, and then I'm looking over to another area, and there's a very interesting feature there, and it's this deep pit that was dug probably about 20, 30 feet away from where that piece was found, where I found that piece. And normally those pits have been described as boat pits, where the pharaoh had his his boat, the solar boats were buried along with the pharaoh as a symbolic gesture for his travels into the afterlife. And there's several on the Giza Plateau, and they've always interested me on the Giza Plateau. But at that moment, it all came together for me, and it's like, this really makes sense now, because it kind of brings the building of the pyramids more into something that would be more achievable in our world, because we've always puzzled about how we would build a great pyramid. Normally we come up short.
More tangible in a way, Chris.
Yes, and it kind of said, wow, okay, this makes sense. You bring your blocks to the site, they're quarried, you bring them to the site, you cut them to size, and then you install them in the pyramid. And they were doing it very efficiently. And it was on an industrial scale, a mega industrial scale.
These saw pits then, Chris, has anybody come up with this? This saw pit idea is your idea then, Chris? This is nobody else's? Nobody else has had any type of a technological function for these saw pits?
Well, James, I don't know if anybody else would want to take credit for it, but no, that's my idea.
No. Yeah, there is no other function for these then, is what I'm trying to say, Chris. No.
Well, obviously, I think Egyptologists are going to stick with their story. I mean, that's firmly embedded in their training.
Sure.
Because they don't even think along the same lines. That's not a criticism. I don't expect them to. Mm-hmm. Do
you think they'll ever embrace engineering as a puzzle to solve their puzzle?
That is an excellent question.
In the same way, Chris, I think about the megalithic civilization of Western Europe. I just wish they would embrace astronomy and stop leaving it to outsiders. The archaeologists never hired an astronomer once to look at these ancient monuments that are all aligned to astronomy. Same as ancient Egypt. Yeah. Highly engineered artifacts, and they don't get any engineers in to look at it. So,
right. Well, how troublesome engineers are. The same happened in Egypt, when Zahi Hawass discovered the workers' village and Mark Lehner was mapping it out and writing papers on it. There was an Egyptian architect that contacted me. And he went to a lecture by Mark Lehner in Cairo at the American Research Institute in Cairo. And he asked some awkward questions. And one of them was, did you engage any construction engineers or architects in your analysis of this village?
Wow.
Before you came to your conclusions. And that was very awkward. He asked another question, and that was, does this look like the work that the ancient Egyptians were capable of doing? It doesn't seem to be, it didn't seem to correspond with their skills. Oh, that was awkward.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the kind of questions that Egyptologists should be asking themselves, because you have
somebody else, yeah.
they're digging around middens and finding, crude structures that are put together like crazy paving. It's just like the dry stone walls.
Hey, Chris, they got the right question. They're just asking the wrong people. They should be asking themselves.
But they didn't engage anybody and ask those questions, and that seems to me to be a fault or a blind spot. But I'm not sure that you can overturn the particular mindset that you have in universities. because I think our attempts at trying to rewrite history, we are looked at as just amateurs in terms of being, rewriting history. And a lot of attempts in the last 20 years to explain Egypt or explain other cultures in a different way.
Deaf ears?
Deaf ears on one hand, and then a lot of kind of really out there ideas that are not founded on credible evidence. And so, when you're kind of mixed in with that group, the whole group is kind of rejected or dismissed. And I've got to be honest, my ideas obviously are extremely controversial, and I was expecting them to be dismissed by conventional academics or Egyptologists, and I wasn't surprised.
They may be controversial, Chris, but they're based in solid fact, and they're based in evidence, and they're based in analysis. Yeah.
But they also threaten the current paradigm that exists in academic Egyptology and actually across a lot of modern disciplines that are taught academically. And it's what I think John Anthony West calls the Church of Progress. It's threatening to actually suggest or to interpret data in such a way that contradicts the idea that we're always getting better.
Yeah.
that there were advanced, intellectually advanced people thousands and thousands of years ago, or that there may have been a technologically advanced society many thousands of years ago.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that just totally overturns the paradigm. And it creates quite a intellectual challenge and a philosophical seismic shock, really, because let's face it, we are raised to believe that we are at the pinnacle of technological progress and that, life continues. We go happily forward into the future. But what this reveals is that civilizations are mortal and, they can be wiped out in an instant. And to argue that did not happen in this case, I think is we're doing
ourselves
we're doing a disservice to people's intellect. It's like, oh, you can't handle the truth.
Here's what seals the deal for me, Chris, with yours, is you don't just have a couple of rogue examples. It's everywhere you go, you seem to turn up evidence. Like, you must be a nightmare, a headache to these guys, Chris.
Oh, I think I am comfortably ignored. I don't know that I they even give me any concern. There are a few people who
ignorance is the last line of defense for these guys, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't spend any time worrying about those guys.
Sure.
I'm quite comfortable doing my thing and documenting my observations. I don't sit around worrying about what this person's going to think or what that person's going to think. And, it's just, that's just the way I am.
That's an engineer's philosophy, Chris.
Right. It's just like,
just get on with the work.
Just show me the facts, and we'll talk about it.
Now, the basalt pavement at the pyramids, Chris, I haven't seen this by myself now. So the next trip I go, I want to see this. There's machine cuts there. There's evidence at the around the basalt pavement like that. Because I actually haven't seen the basalt pavement for the 3 times I was in Egypt. I've overlooked all this, but I can't wait to go back and have a look at this now. But perhaps tell us about the machine.
That was something that really popped out at me after I went to Abu Rawash because then I started looking very carefully for more examples of the use of those kind of saws, particularly when you find those pits on the Giza Plateau too.
Mm-hmm.
And the finest example is actually near the basalt pavement, where you see the marks left by these mega machines that were cutting basalt, very hard stone, igneous rock, and cutting it very efficiently. And the tool marks are there, the striations are there, the geometry is there. It's an engineer's playground. It's like the Mecca for engineers, you know. Go to Egypt, go on a pilgrimage,
Sure.
be humbled.
Sure. The casing stones, they always talk, that's one of the first things that I ever heard about in terms of advanced technology or advanced machining or something like that, going back a long time now, because everybody that's gone there talked about how close the casing stones fit together that you can't get a sheet of paper between them. And how accurate are these in terms of what you are turning up in other places?
You know, I haven't done the measure of the casing stones. There are very few of them left. There's a couple on the north side.
Right.
But Petrie had measured them. He reported they were within 10,000ths of an inch over 75 square inches.
Right.
And so, and then they fitted together to line with a maximum of 20,000ths of an inch gap. That, to me, is not as precise as what you find on the inside of the Great Pyramid. So if you go on the inside and head down to the Queen's Chamber and look at the way the blocks that form the Queen's Chamber are fitted together,
Mm-hmm.
you'll find the kind of precision that you're talking about in terms of not being able to slip a piece of paper between joints, and also in the King's Chamber and the Grand Gallery. Throughout all the chambers on the inside of the Great Pyramid, those that were constructed, they were using extreme precision.
Mm-hmm. Sure. The obelisks, this one outside, I think it's a Karnak Temple? The one with the tool marks, where you can see the way they are actually carved in the glyphs. You can also, just look, it looks like a router bit went into the obelisk. That's one only thing I can explain. If anybody's seen a router where they cut slots in wood and stuff like.
Right.
The only difference is they're doing this in pink granites and very hard materials like.
Yeah, I mean, very deep grooves. About less than 1/8 of an inch thick or wide, and 10 times as deep. So the aspect ratio is fairly significant. And you have to ask, how were they doing that? And then the tool marks on the bottom of the sunken reliefs that you can determine there.
Mm-hmm.
It's all over the place. Once you start to look for it, it's not like looking for faces in the clouds or,
Sure.
Google images.
Yeah, it just stands out then once you start addressing the problem as such.
Right. And it's, it's definitely, it's the hard facts, the smoking gun.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, and it's the same in Peru and Bolivia. I mean, you have the similar precision, not quite, to the extent that you find in Egypt, but it's, definitely, they were definitely doing something.
I've been to, Peru since we last spoke, Chris, and, I went to, have you been to Sacsayhuaman? I presume you have.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh.
What do you think of that wall, Chris?
That wall is quite incredible, isn't it? I mean,
I beg any engineer. It's like going to the pyramid. Just go to Sacsayhuaman or go to the pyramid. Those two for me are the two biggest engineering anomalies on the planet. It's incredibly complex jigsaw, like multi-ton stones, multi-sided.
Oh my God, yeah.
It's frightening to think. And you know what else? They lean at a bit of an angle, and the big ones lean into the little ones. It's like they were leaning stuff in 3D shapes as well. And bizarre.
Yeah, I think the jagged design is very interesting too.
Yes, the jagged design, and again, there's like an acoustic anomaly when you stand away from the wall as well, whether that was intentional or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I just the the task of putting the thing together, fitting out all the blocks together.
I mean, how would you do that? Would you not need a model of that before you even start? Like, you couldn't just take blocks and fit them one at a time. Not only do they weigh some of them up to 120 tons, like, but you couldn't just start putting them one in place, take it away, measure, cut one in place, because they got nine. You'd need to have like a jigsaw of a miniature model. I would imagine something like that.
I don't know. I thought long and hard about that. I mean, normally when somebody imagines how they fitted it together, they would have them lift one piece on the other and find out where they need to remove material, take it up, remove that material, put it back, so on and so forth until they got a good fit. Mm-hmm. It does seem like, wow, it's just actually lifting some of those blocks and accomplishing that. A kind of agrarian civilization that was not technologically advanced. How would you even come up with such a concept of doing that? Or think that it was within your reach to do that? It's quite amazing. But then, the other thing, there's a lot of mystery in Peru and Bolivia, that's for sure. And how they accomplished what they did is still a mystery. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that occurred to me the last time I was there was that they actually built those walls horizontally before they put them vertically, or they fitted them horizontally before they put them together. And they were able to, hold the stones in position.
Eliminate gravity first, and then
and have. And be able to roll them. I mean, you find all these balls, and they found a lot of balls under the structures in the Coricancha, and and so their technique for moving these blocks around, maybe they were able to fixture this on a piece of wood or something or whatever, or in some way be able to move those blocks horizontally, and then just
the ground.
Yeah. And then, you could bring a block in proximity with the other and then use a scribe, and then use a spacer to actually determine whether you have the
parallel or not.
Fit. Yeah.
Fascinating. Funny enough, there's those balls that you're talking about are in the Hypogeme as well, and in Malta temples.
Yeah. I think more for seismic purposes than anything. It seems to me that they were putting balls under their structures so that when the ground moved, the structure didn't move the same way as the ground was. Yeah. But that's just
took the vibration of.
Yeah. But yeah, well, I mean, how did the ancient people do things? You can't always immediately jump to the conclusion that they were using anti-gravity or machines. And the Sacsayhuaman is a prime example of a structure that looks like, well, there's no way that it doesn't have the precision of machine work. Or there's not, that you don't have identical geometry and surfaces that you can measure and say, oh, yeah, okay, they were doing this over and over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so they had some kind of design that they were working with.
Sure. I think they knew their consciousness was going to fall from grace one day, and they went, we better build something for these guys in the future to just make them think. That's what I reckon.
Well, yeah. I think we know as we get older that our consciousness is going to fall from grace. It's called aging.
Dave, have you got a question there before I jump onto the update from Egypt?
Yeah, absolutely. Just stay in South America for a bit, Chris, because it's my particular interest as well, that part of the world. And I just wanted to get your reflections on Pumapunku from an engineering point of view, because it's very, very different from Tiwanaku in many respects, which is next door to it, but extremely different from the sites in Peru, such as Sacsayhuaman or underneath the Coricancha. But it seemed to my untutored eye, from an engineering point of view, when I visited it, that it is very much a lot of the stones there have been engineered in some way. I mean, there are many with circular cuts inside the stones and rebates and etc. etc. So I really would appreciate your views on Pumapunku.
Well, I went there originally in 2005, and what I had taken some tools with me, inspection instruments. And we went to La Paz. I found that I couldn't use the full range of instruments that I had. So we went to La Paz, and we were going to spend one night in Tiwanaku. And because of what I was able to see in Peru, I wasn't really anticipating needing the precise instruments that I brought along. And so I left them at the hotel in La Paz, and then we went out to Tiwanaku. So we got to Tiwanaku and went to Pumapunku, and then I walked on site, and the first thing I noticed is this block sitting in the middle with a series of holes drilled into a groove. I went to that block, and I looked at it closely. I felt the surface. It seemed to be extremely flat, but I had no means to tell me how flat it was. So I got the driver, paid him money, of course, and I could not leave this place without checking it further a little more closely. So I had him drive me back to La Paz, where I got my suitcase that had all my tools in it, and then we drove back to Tiwanaku. And the next day, I was able to, get my straight edge on it, my square, and also calipers to measure the distance between the holes and look at some other stuff. And on another trip, I had a surface gauge with an indicator, and I was able to check some surfaces that appear to be extremely flat. I say indicator, that's the American term. In England, we called it a clock. I think you know what that is, yeah? Mm-hmm. It's a gauge for actually measuring the displacement of irregularities or the condition of a surface. So you run it across a surface, you'd be able to check to see what the tolerance of the surface is. And these flat surfaces were within 0.5 thousandths of an inch, which was incredible.
Yeah.
I went back in 2011 and did the same thing, and I had some observers who verified and actually did the same test. And, but I was also very interested in the H blocks, and so I did some measurements of the H blocks, because what I wanted to know was how consistent the cavities were in the H blocks, and whether they showed some regularity or replication of a particular methodology or geometric measurements, precision. And what I found with those was that these cavities were not parallel. The walls were not parallel with each other, and they were actually dovetailed, which kind of shocked me. It was interesting.
Oh.
Because all the illustrations I'd seen on these blocks showed them the surfaces to be parallel. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to find out, how precise they were. The blocks that I measured, the cavities that I measured, varied about 300 thousandths of an inch, almost half an inch. Wow. So obviously you can't argue that, they were making them all the same, identical. Mm. But the similar features though were very interesting. The surfaces were extremely flat. The corners, extremely sharp, with a relief cut in the corner of them. But it was the geometry of these cavities that caught my attention because they were dovetailed, and so when we consider what we use dovetails for, we use them in cabinet making. We use them, they're a very effective assembly feature when you're trying to assemble something to hold something in place. And so, the next question in my mind was, well, what were they doing with these dovetails? What was going into these cavities? What was being held in place? And the idea came to me around 3 o'clock in the morning, when most of my ideas actually pop into my brain. Was that they were actually using those blocks as hinge blocks. They were installed in the doorways and the walls, and then into those cavities they had inserts through which they put a hinge. And so I created an example of one of those, and I did a demo for Ancient Aliens, and showed how that would have functioned. And
explains the dovetail, Chris, doesn't it?
Mm.
It did explain, and it worked very well. I mean, it works, and whether that was the precise reason for them, I don't know. It's all theory, obviously, but but it does kind of explain the reason why there are only a few of them, rather than a sufficient number to build a whole wall, because, a lot of the artist impressions that I've seen show these blocks being assembled into actually locking together, being assembled to make a whole wall, and being more of an architectural feature rather than a functional feature. And so, that seemed to explain that we don't have more of those. And also the fact that from one block to the other, you don't have regularity in the dimensions. And and I didn't see any feature where, in the area that you could say, okay, this interlocks with this interlocks with this. But anyway, so that was a very interesting trip, and I need to do more study down there too, and I plan on doing that in the future.
Sure. So, Chris, just going to wrap it up soon enough. I just wanted to talk about your recent trip to Egypt, because you've just come back and you were with Brian Forster, Gary Evans, Stephen Mailer.
Oh yeah.
You've had was that quite a success then? Did you come up with any new information, anything interesting, any stories to tell us?
Well, I did find out that Gary Evans is not the guy you think he is.
Very good.
But I did also learn that I would really like to do more tours with him, because I found him to be a delightful tour host, companion, very amusing guy, very engaging guy. Definitely got along very well with him.
He's very people orientated, Gary. I like what he does. I like talking to him as well. I could talk to him for hours. He's a good conversationist.
Well, he doesn't have a huge ego, which,
Sure.
or if he does, he doesn't show it in a negative way. He calls me a dirty boy, which, I rarely do I meet anybody who is that insightful into my character.
Very good. Yeah, Gary told me that you guys had great fun over there. And
we had the bus roaring with laughter. I mean, we were the Morecambe and Wise of the travel industry on that trip, I think.
Yeah. It's quite a big tour that Gary had that time as well. It's quite successful, he was telling me. So
it was a huge success, and it wasn't just the size of the group, but the character and the spirit of the group was amazing.
How did Stephen get on, and how did Brian get on?
I thought they did okay. I mean, I've always loved being in Egypt with Stephen Mailer. He's a very passionate
Very
man.
passionate guy.
Yeah, very, very passionate.
When
Yeah.
he was on the show, you can hear it in the voice. You know when you've got a passionate person now and again. It's the ideas they express and the speed at which it comes out. Like, he's definitely a passionate guy. He loves it, man.
Oh yeah, yeah. And of course, we had a passionate discussion at one point, and it was like he was going at it, and I was going at it, and I think the rest of the group thought we may be mad at each other, but that wasn't true. That's we both have strong ideas and express them, and there's no animosity, none at all. So it was a wonderful trip. I enjoyed it.
Sure. Have you got any conferences or trips coming up? And have you any books or projects that you're working on? I know you've got one. I don't know if you want to share that with us.
Well, I was going to write a book on Pumapunku.
Right.
And I haven't got around to that yet. As soon as I retired from my old company, I was snapped up by another company.
You've retired several times now, Chris. Have you?
Well, it was one of those things that happened, and it's kind of like, what is retirement? And I don't know. I had planned to do a lot of stuff after I retired from the old company. Writing more books, doing more traveling. I don't have any plans for the rest of the year, except to continue working. And, wherever that takes me, I do have a project that I'm working on that I'm very excited about. I don't know where that's going to lead, but just the prospects of success are very exciting.
Wonderful.
And it could also tie into, the ancient, technology kind of, area.
Wonderful.
I'm going to be, I'm turning my attention to Coral Castle.
Ah.
Fascinating, fascinating mission, this one, Chris.
Yeah. And, so that is a, kind of exciting. It's almost like, I studied it, I wrote about it in the Giza power plant, and then I was off doing other things. And it was always my attention to, go back to it. But like everything else, you have to have some things don't happen, until the time is right. So the time was never right, and now it is. So now I'm actually, going to focus on that.
Sounds fascinating. You wouldn't be that far anyway in geographic terms from there, would you?
No. Well, I mean,
better than what we are anyway.
What is it? 900 miles or something like that.
Okay, so.
Not as far as Stonehenge. Or Pumapunku.
Sure. Okay, Chris, give us out your website where we can get your books, and we'll wrap it up with that, I think.
Right, and we didn't even talk about the Hathor Temple, but maybe we'll do that another time.
Well, you can mention, actually, would you believe it? No, we haven't, and that's probably one of the most fascinating analogies you had in the book, where the top of these columns, the Hathor columns, what is there, 96 I think there is?
Well, in the hypostyle hall, there's about 24 of them, but with 4 sides, yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah. Well, let's come back again, Chris. There's so much to talk about and touch on. Like, I think there's plenty more to talk about in Egypt. But, the Hathor columns were, man, they blew me away. Just very hard to analyze those too, Chris. Like, I mean, just to even analyze them and the evidence, like.
Yeah, a picture tells 1,000 words, doesn't it?
For sure. I mean, here's what I kind of felt when I was reading the book, The Lost Technologies of Ancient Egypt, was that I wanted you to get up high to take these photographs face on to get better photographs. Like, it's like you can understand tripod and the equipment, and of course some of this stuff is high and out of the way and not accessible or hard to photograph. Just even taking a still shot, it's hard to photograph, because the better the quality of the photograph, the better the measurements, the better the analysis.
Yep. Yeah.
Oh. And that's what I'm saying, Egyptology on your side would really help, Chris, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And, it's hard to say how the climate will change over there. And, but we always have hopes. I mean, I've had interest expressed from people who are actually on the ground in Egypt, professionals, and, it's just a matter of engaging with them, finding the time and money to, actually do more research there. And I think that is the answer, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, on the Hathor problem, at the Temple of Dendera and the Hathor columns.
Yeah.
I mean, having a scaffold to get up there to maybe take the photographs face on.
Yeah.
That would
but the photographs that I did take did allow a lot of good information in terms of how the columns were oriented and related to each other.
So it's worthy of further research, undoubtedly. It's.
Yeah, well, the way I see it, and honestly, and I've recognized this for a long time, is that I serve as more as a bell ringer. I'm more going over to the piece and I'm waving a flag or ringing a bell and saying, okay, we need to look at this a little closer.
Sure. And in terms of metrology and precision measurement, nobody's really been doing this, Chris, until you walked in, granted a number of years ago now, and the Giza power plant, and that was really...
Well, William Flinders Petrie did his best in his time, and but before you start to engage high precision instruments, your mind has to be turned towards the possibility that they existed in prehistory, and that's where Egyptology they have not come that far yet. They can't.
In terms of the time frame that Petrie's lived in, I mean, he was a pioneer in his day, but undoubtedly he was, he pioneered. Well, he looked at striations and the drill cores. I think we touched on that last time, and the reverberation rate, and even to measure that, you would have to have a string and wind it into the grooves to measure the distance between them to calculate the rate of penetration. It's crazy, but unless you're looking for it. But again, technology wasn't as advanced as it was now. Obviously, he started the Industrial Revolution and whatever. It only got so far until Petrie was looking at it, And,
he was measuring the inside of the coffers with chains, and so that's where you have to say, he was a surveyor. He was using the tools of his trade. And doing the best job he could. And so, we'll add to the record now and use, more precise instruments and see what they reveal.
Well, it's nice that you do pay homage to him in the book as well as now, Chris. That is good to see that,
He was a brilliant man. He had very keen observation.
Every time I'm in London, I try to get to the Petrie Museum as well. It's in the University College London, isn't it? UCL, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, UCL. But wonderful little museum, because Petrie, just for the listeners, Petrie picked up the stuff that nobody else wanted, didn't he? He took up all the stuff. Well, look at this stuff. This pottery shards here, and there's curved grooves on them, and there's striations and cores, and this is telling a story. It's telling us another story,
Exactly. And he was the son of an engineer, by the way.
Oh, was he?
Yeah. What does that tell you?
He was trained with the engineering mind for sure then.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the son of an engineer myself, and my dad's a mechanical engineer, and incidentally, he's left-handed, Chris, and he's actually into hypnotism as well. He plays musical instruments by ear. You can't read sheet music, He's a very intuitive engineer, he's a genius as far as I'm concerned, because he uses that other part of the brain. And,
right.
So it's kind of why I took to engineering. I got inspired by a very good engineer.
There you go.
It's
it is a good field to be in, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's such a wide spectrum too, Chris, isn't it? Electrical, electronic, sound engineering, it's just bizarre. So many fields of engineering now.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, we'll finish on that note. Dave, do you want to say anything before we go?
No, only it's been a great pleasure interviewing you, Chris. It's been really enjoyable, informative.
And me too, Chris. It's been very enlightening and informative as well. So, pleasure having you on the show, Chris. Has been.
Well, it's been a pleasure being here, James and David. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Well, we'll talk to you again in the future, no doubt, Chris.
Yes, I hope so.
And we'll get your next book out, yeah?
Don't hold your breath.
Okay. No worries. Well, Chris, thanks for being on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, thank you.